Welcome back to Respectfully Inspired with Aussie Films. Today I'm doing episode 83 solo, self-titled College Dropout Explains Money in Terms of Time, Creation, and God. I am so excited to be back filming another solo podcast. This is the longest period since I started my podcast that I haven't filmed a solo podcast. And something I love about solo podcasts is it challenges me to learn, which school indoctrinated me to think I hated learning. But once I just started learning about the things I wanted to learn about, I actually love learning. And two, solo podcasts really challenged me to be a better speaker because I don't have anyone to parlay off of, to carry the conversation. It's just me and whoever's listening on the other side of the screen. Since the last time we talked, I crossed Europe using only Red Bull as currency for 7 days, yada, yada, yada. Check out the live streams. And today's episode is all about money. Of course, as a Christian, I'm going to give some biblical insight on money. I'm going to give some governmental insight on money because I just learned some absolutely mind-blowing facts. And then I'm going to give what I would like to call the money matrix, the shocking reality of money. And the reason I'm doing this episode is because a friend of mine, Chris Hopkins, actually challenged me. He said, "Can you have a relationship with someone you don't know?" I said, "No, obviously not." And he said, "Well then, how do you expect to have a relationship with money if you don't know money?" And other than it being a piece of paper that can buy things printed by the government, I literally knew nothing about money. And I hope that what I've learned in this past week, what I've learned in the past year what I've learned in the past week relating to the government and money, time and energy and money, I'm hoping I can give to you in a 30 minutes to an hour long podcast. And what I've learned about God and money in the last year, hopefully that can also be in this 30-minute to an hour long podcast. So I'm so excited. I don't usually read off a prompter because I find that I'm not as good of a speaker when I'm trying to hit bullet points, but for this episode, I have to, so let me know how that goes. We're going to get right into the first topic, which is something. I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to give it away. I want you to do this exercise with me. Actually, before I go into this, I should probably tell you guys that my friend Chris Hopkins, who was getting me on this wave, he was telling me about how nobody thinks. And I know that's so silly because you have to think to exist. You wake up, you think all day, you do your tasks by thinking, and you go to bed and it's like, can you even exist without thinking? So yes, people think, but Henry Ford famously said, thinking is the hardest work there is, which is why so few people engage in it. I'm going to tell you a story. When I was with my friend Chris Hopkins, we were in a house in the Hollywood Hills of LA. Extremely nice house. A bunch of kids my age, they were creators, and they were paying $20,000 a month in rent to live in this LA beach house. Or not beach house, this LA house in the hills overlooking the California skyscrapers and whatever is in LA. Sorry, I explained that so poorly. But anyways, kids my age, they're creators, they must be making significant money to live in this house, but I don't know anything about these creators. I'm just in the house. I don't know what these kind of content these creators do. I don't know how much money they do make. All I know is that they're paying $20,000 to live in this dream LA Hills mansion house. However, halfway through this hangout, I find out they're actually getting paid to live in the house. And they're not getting paid because some agency stuck them in there and said, make content. They're getting paid because all they did was think. Now, I know this sounds silly, but they're paying $20,000 a month in rent, and they just sat there and they thought about their situation, and they said, well, we have one of the nicest houses in LA. We're surrounded by performers and people who make a lot of money. Our house has a pool. It's very spacious. It overlooks the hills. What if we just rented out our house a few times a month so that these celebrities can host parties, host events in our house So therefore, we can actually get paid to live in our dream house in the Hollywood Hills. And then they went and executed on that plan. So essentially, they went from paying $20,000 a month in rent to just thinking to now getting paid to live in their dream house, and not only getting paid, having the best possible introductions to celebrities they want to meet. So that's the power of thinking. I don't know if I've been telling that story to people all week, and some people are like, that's so silly. I would have thought of that right away. I don't know. Maybe you would have thought of that. I would say that's hindsight bias. All they did was think. So my friend's getting me on this, and I'm like, dude, I need to study money. I need to think. And that leads us into the first kind of topic of this podcast, which is I'm asking myself, what is the definition of money? And first, I answer it from my point of view. And my point of view is money is a paper or digital currency that buys you things. That was my definition. And then I went on Google, and this is what Google said. Money is a current medium of exchange in the form of coins and banknotes. So my definition, Google's definition, is pretty similar. Paper or digital currency that you can exchange for things, a medium of exchange. So then I asked myself, what does money exchange for? Well, you can pretty much buy anything with money when you really think about it. So the easier way to approach this question is, what can't you buy with money? Now, I know this is a big philosophical debate, but we're going to put happiness in the can't buy. And I would say, actually, you can't really buy any long-term emotional thing. So you can't buy happiness. You can't buy long-term peace, long-term happiness. You can't buy long-term enjoyment, fulfillment. Pretty much any long-term emotional thing you cannot buy. And of course, you cannot buy salvation, because that needs to be paid with the blood of Jesus Christ. So anything that is soul related, anything that is long-term emotional related, you cannot buy with money. But essentially everything else you can exchange for money. You can exchange labor for money. You can exchange physical property for money, intellectual property. You can exchange pretty much anything except long-term emotions or soul-based things. So now we have the definition of money. We know what it exchanges for. So how are the things that money exchanges for created? So I'm not asking how happiness is created. I'm not asking how peace is created, because those things you can't exchange with money. How is all the things that you can exchange with money created? So if I hire someone to work for me, I'm exchanging money for labor. That person who's giving me labor is giving me their time and their energy. Okay, what if I go and buy a chair at the store? How is that chair made? Well, someone spent their time and energy making that chair, and they sold it to me. Okay, what if I go to school and I learn something intellectual in class, and I pay to go to school? How was the thing that I learned in school created? Well, the teacher spent their time and energy creating the course and teaching it to me. So essentially, every single thing you can buy or exchange with money was created with someone's time and energy. Therefore, a better definition of money is the digital or paper form of time and energy. So this is, I'm start to trip out. I go from definition of money to what does money exchange for, to how are the things that money exchanges for made, to, all right, now I have this new definition of money, a paper or digital currency, or time and energy in the form of a paper or digital currency. So then I'm getting all deep with myself, and I say, how is money made? This is the most simple way that I knew. In part 2 of this podcast, we're going to break how money is made down, because it's actually absurdly mind-blowing. But for simplicity, what I've heard and what you guys have all heard and what we know to be true is that the government prints money. So then, if money is time and energy in paper form and the government prints money, what does it cost the government to print money? Well, it costs the government the price of the materials. So money is made with very cheap metals, and it's made with very cheap paper. So essentially, the government pays nothing to make money. The government just prints money. So therefore, money is time and energy in digital form. Who makes money? The government. How does the government make money? By printing it for essentially nothing. So the government prints money for essentially nothing and then can trade it for your time and energy. And I'm thinking to myself, slavery? Question mark? Let me say that again. The government prints money for essentially nothing, then trades it for your time and energy. Slavery? Question mark? The government prints money for essentially nothing, then trades it for your time and energy, and then taxes you. So the government prints a piece of paper that it can exchange for your time and energy, and then it taxes you to pay them back time and energy. I hope I'm explaining this well, because when I learned this, and I really just learned this by thinking, when I just learned this by thinking, I was like, that is absolutely absurd. And maybe it's not absurd to you, but it was absurd to me. And I wasn't going to stop there, because what do you get that information and you just go, okay, so now I might be a slave to the government, or I might be a slave to money. What do I do with this information? And I'm thinking about it more and more and more. And I have a very personal example. My dad makes good money. I don't know the exact amount of money my dad makes. He's never told me. But we live in Southern California, 5 minutes away from the beach. My dad makes good money. I don't make good money. I have like less than $100 in my bank account. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But anyways, my dad makes good money. However, my dad works from the moment he wakes up pretty much until the moment he goes to sleep. Sometimes he'll watch TV for an hour or two before he goes to bed. My dad gets his Bible studies in. He mentors people, so he's still in the Word, which is the most important vitality of life. But pretty much my dad wakes up, works, and then he goes to sleep after working. And I was thinking about that. Is my dad rich? And I want to remove my dad from this equation, because I bring up the example of my dad to show you that I've personally witnessed this. But now I'll move on from my dad as an example, and I'll just talk about, if someone has loads of money and they wake up, work every second of the day, and then go to sleep, is that person rich? I don't think so, because as we stated earlier, money is time and energy in paper form. So if I have millions of dollars of time and energy in paper form, but my whole day is filled with work, so therefore all my time is occupied by work and all my energy is drained by work, am I really that rich? And I just sat there and thought to myself, no, I don't think so. And I'm going through all these realizations with my friend Chris Hopkins, and my friend Chris Hopkins hits me with one of the craziest quotes I've ever heard. And I'm just going to make sure that I quote him correctly. This is what my friend Chris Hopkins says. Given everything we just discovered, the richest person is not the person with the most money. The richest person is the one who inputs the least and outputs the most, because the goal is freedom. Let me say that again. The richest person is not the person who has the most money. Because if someone has abundant money, but they work every second of the day, well, money is time and energy in paper form, and they're spending their time and energy all on work. So although they have it in paper form, do they really have it in their life? Therefore, the richest person is the one who inputs the least and outputs the most, because the goal is freedom. Wow, that's so good. This is what Chris Hopkins recommends, going off that quote. I hope that quote gives you a little bit more direction of how to approach money. And I want you guys to know I'm not some expert on money. Everything I've learned is recent, but I just know that I do not want to be a slave to money. I don't want to be a slave to the government. I want to be a slave to Christ, which we're going to talk about in part 3 of this podcast. But given that the richest person, my new definition of the richest person, as well as Chris Hopkins, is that the richest person is the person who inputs the least and outputs the most, because the goal is freedom. This is what Chris Hopkins recommends you do, and I think it's a pretty good plan. Is you, as far as money, calculate how much money would I need to live my dream life. Let's just say it's $1 million to live my dream life. That includes how I want to eat, how I want to travel, the house I want to buy, etc., etc., etc. I know $1 million probably actually wouldn't be enough for that, but let's just hypothetically say $1 million is how much you've calculated you would need to live your dream life. What you'd want to do is obtain $1 million, which I know it's just silly to say obtain $1 million, but this is not how you get money podcast. This is just that's a different episode. So you go watch Alex Hermosi or something. If I don't know, that's a separate topic. But let's say I've determined $1 million would be enough to live my dream life. What you would do is you would obtain $1 million. Then you would ask yourself, is this really enough? Because you would have the money and you'd get to be able to experience and calculate. Okay, if $1 million is enough to live my dream life, what I should now spend the rest of my time and energy doing is not how do I make my $1 million $10 million. What you should spend your time and energy is how do I output $1 million with the least amount of input. So if I'm working 12-hour days to make $1 million, what I should do is say, how can I make $1 million in 8-hour days? How can I make it in 6-hour days? Not how can I take my $1 million portfolio and make it $100 billion, because that's pointless. Then you're just giving up your time and energy to make more paper time and energy, and you're just stuck in the rat race even though you think you've escaped it. That was my huge breakaway with money is time and energy, which is the first section of this podcast. 16 minutes. I hope that was valuable to you. If not, I'm sorry. Now, given my personal think work, so part one of this podcast was me analyzing myself, going deep, trying to question myself with money, trying to question my motives. And I also want to touch on part one. When I talk about your dream life and calculating all this is how I will approach money, but money is always below God. God comes first. You seek first the kingdom, Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom above all else, and everything else will be provided to you. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. Seek the kingdom of God above all else, and everything else will be taken care of. Your focus shouldn't be money, at least coming from me. So I just want to tell you how I'm approaching money, but it's certainly not my primary focus, or the goal is that it's not my primary focus. I'm sure I've fallen into that trap at times. And actually why I've avoided talking about money online or this money system is because I would take the Bible and be like, I literally can't talk about money because money is not what I'm supposed to be focused on. So I've done such a good job on not focusing on money, but I also think I've missed out on using money as a tool. And so I'm excited to focus on it, but I need to make sure that I never put it above God. We're going into part 2 of this podcast, which is the scam of the money system, the money matrix per se. When I did all that think work in part 1, was like, I need to learn more about money. I asked Chris Hopkins for some good resources, the hidden secrets of money.com. He took me there. Most of this information is from there, so hopefully that's a good source. And I educated myself in this past week, and what I learned about the government printing money is absolutely mind-blowing. And I'm going to try to explain it to you so that you can understand what it means that the government prints money, or if you've ever heard like the banks are evil, the central banking system, the Fed. Now, I'm not going to be perfect at this because I'm newly studied, but I hope that I can break it down for you. So, actually, I'm going to go into my deeper notes. Prepare yourself for the biggest scam in the history of mankind. It starts with the branch of the government called the Treasury. The Treasury creates something called bonds. What are bonds? Bonds are glorified IOUs. What is an IOU? IOU is literally what it sounds like. I owe you. If I give my brother a chocolate bar and he doesn't pay me for it, he doesn't have a chocolate bar to give me in return, he might say, I owe you one. I'm going to get you a chocolate bar in the future. That is essentially what a bond is. The treasurer creates a pretty piece of paper with numbers on it, nothing but a glorified IOU. That paper might say something along the lines of, loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period, I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion with interest. So the treasury creates this piece of paper. It has some dollar amount on it, and they sell it to you. So you pay them whatever, $10 million, and they say, I'm going to pay this back in 10 years with interest. Who does the Treasury sell these bonds to? The Treasury sells these bonds to the banks. So basically the Treasury says, I have a bond for $1 million, and then all the banks line up and they say, they have a bond auction. I don't know what that means, how that works, but essentially all these banks bid on this bond. One of the banks buys the bond and they all celebrate, because why would a bank be celebrating that they're going to pay $1 million for a piece of paper and then get interest in 10 plus years? Here's why the banks celebrate. Because the banks don't actually wait the 10-year period or whatever. The banks immediately take the bonds and they sell them to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is another branch of the government. So the Federal Reserve buys the bonds from the banks, and the banks bought the bonds from the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve buys the bonds with a check. And you know how if we were to write checks, I know my generation doesn't really know what a check is, but essentially a check is a piece of paper where you take money out of your bank account and I write, I'm going to give you $100, you take the check to your bank, and then the $100 comes into your existence. But if I'm writing a check, I have to have that amount of money in my bank account. However, when the Federal Reserve writes a check, they're writing a check from a bank account that has no money in it. How does that work? When they write the check, that money that they write the check for just comes into existence. So I hope that I'm explaining this well, but let me just lay it down simply. The Treasury creates a bond, which is a glorified IOU. They sell it to the banks. The bank goes and sells it to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve writes a check for that bond. The bank account that the Federal Reserve uses has no dollars. So when they write that check, dollars of that check amount just come into the system, the money system that we use. So that's how money is made. Obviously, the Treasury is the one that actually prints it, but the Federal Reserve writing the checks is how money comes into existence. All right, this is a struggle to explain this stuff. So basically just know that the banks, the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and that's how currency comes into existence. The Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs by trading with the banks. The glorified IOU from the Treasury is the bonds. The glorified IOU from the Federal Reserve is the checks. I hope this makes sense. That is how a portion of our dollars come into existence. Now here is how another portion of our dollars come into existence. When you work and you get paid money, a salary, generally what most of the population does with that money and a salary is they take it and deposit it into their bank. So when you get paid, when I get paid, when a majority of people get paid, they take the money and they go and deposit it into the bank. Let's say you deposit $100 into the bank. What you might think happens is that the bank keeps all $100 in a vaulted safe, and that when you come back and you request $100, they give it back to you. But that's not actually what happens. What happens is that there's these things called reserve ratios. Reserve ratios vary, but for the purpose of this example, let's say you input $100 into your bank, and let's say the reserve ratio is 10%. What that means is that the banks legally have to keep 10% of your deposit in the bank. So you input $100, the banks legally have to keep $10 in the bank just in case you want it in the future. So then what do the banks do with the $90 that they're not keeping in the bank? They loan it out to another person. Let's say another person separate from me needs to buy a house. They come to the bank, they say, I need a loan. That person is going to get the $90 from the $100 that I deposited. But what if I go back to the bank and I say, I need all $100 back? Are they just screwed? Are they going to just give me $10 back? No. What they do is they create glorified IOUs, which are called bank credit, in your place. So digitally, they put that you still have $100 in your bank account, and you can go and spend this $100. You can go and spend the $100, so you aren't aware that your money isn't being kept because they put these bank credits in your account, and the bank credits operate just like money. In fact, the bank credits become money. So every time you deposit money into the bank and they loan out whatever percentage of your money and they put bank credit in your account, currency is being created. So currency is not just created by the government printing it, doing these exchanges from Treasury to Federal Reserve. Money is created every time you deposit into your bank. And I gave you the example of 10%. That means that $100 deposited into your bank, loaned out a specific amount of times, can become $1,000 of currency in circulation. And that's a 10% reserve ratio. Some reserve ratios are as low as 3% and 0%. So I don't know what the ratio of government-created currency and bank-created currency, but about 10 years ago, banks actually created, I want to say 92, in 2013, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence was not created by the government, but by the banking system, which is weird. Why would the government let the banking system create so much currency? And the banks were also the ones buying the bonds off of the Treasury, selling them to the Federal Reserve at a profit. So essentially, the banks are just profiting money. Because remember, or I guess not remember because I haven't explained this yet. Gosh, there's so much to say I don't even know where to start. Let's rewind a little bit. So I've explained to you how money is created. Why are we allowed to infinitely print money? And by we, I don't mean myself. I mean the government and the banks. Why are the government and the banks allowed to infinitely print money? I don't know if you know this, but the US dollar is a fiat currency. What is a fiat currency? A fiat currency is a currency that is not backed by gold or silver. Now, I don't know if anyone my age knows that currencies used to be backed by gold or silver, so let's rewind. Let's pretend you're in ancient Egypt, whatever. The first currency in creation was gold and silver. What makes money money? What makes a currency currency? This is the criteria to make money money. It has to be a medium of exchange. That means it can be exchanged for things. It has to be a unit of account, which means it has numbers attached to it. It has to be portable, can be transported easily. So for example, back in the olden days, people would trade cows and stuff, but you can't just throw a cow in your purse. So that's not portable. It has to be durable. At one point, people sold tea as currency, or they sold tobacco as currency, but those things aren't durable. They break apart easily. It has to be divisible. It has to be able to be divided. It has to be fungible. That means $1 in my pocket is worth the same amount of money as $1 in your pocket. Those are all the requirements for currency to become a currency. But money actually goes one step further. Money has to be a store of value. A store of value refers to an asset, currency, or commodity that you can save or exchange and retrieve in the future without any depreciation in value. So the difference between currency and money is store of value. To be qualified as money, you can't lose any purchasing power. So actually, when people call the dollar money, they're actually incorrect. And every form of money in the world that is a fiat currency, which means a paper bill not backed by gold, actually isn't a store of value. It doesn't retain its purchasing power. Why doesn't it retain its purchasing power? Because the government around the world, this is not exclusive to America, the government is printing more and more of the money. And the more you print of money, the more the prices cost. Therefore, the government can actually steal your purchasing power by printing money. So I hope I'm explaining it well because it's so confusing. This is where the money matrix is actually mind-blowing. You can have $10 and the government can have $10, and you guys should be able to equally buy $10 worth of assets. But the government can print $100 more. And now the government has $110, which their dollars will lose purchasing power, but they'll have more of the dollars, and therefore they can buy more stuff. Whereas your dollars, $10 won't be able to purchase what $10 used to be able to purchase because there's now more money in circulation. So just by printing, the person who prints the money actually steals purchasing power away from everyone who owns the money. And we shouldn't be calling it money. The person who prints the currency can steal purchasing power from everyone else who owns the currency. So, I mean, in part one, we already talked about how absurd is it that someone can print something for essentially nothing and then trade it for your time and energy. But then worse of all, they not only print it and trade it for your time and energy, they tax you on it. So they print it, trade it for your time and energy, and then request a certain amount of that back. And they steal your purchasing power by printing more of the currency, which is absolutely absurd. You as a citizen are just being absolutely dongle cucked in every way possible. I actually forgot to mention a really important another way that you are getting screwed, which is that when you're taxed, you're told that your tax dollars are going to public roads, schools, whatever governmental programs the politicians are promising. A huge majority of your tax dollars are going to paying off the bonds that the government created. Remember a few minutes ago I told you how the Treasury creates bonds, and the bonds essentially say, give me $1 million, and in 10 years, I'll give you $1 million plus interest. And then they sell those to the banks, and the banks sell those to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve writes checks that come out of a bank account with $0. Well, someone still needs to pay those checks, those glorified IOUs. So who pays them? Not the government, not the banks, not the Treasury, our tax dollars. So the government prints something for free, trades it for our time and energy, then taxes us on it so that the government can use our tax dollars to pay off their own bill that they created so that they can steal prosperity from us. I hope that makes sense to you. I know it's so complicated, but it's just absolutely absurd. I needed to come in and make sure that you guys knew that. Wild. We need to get back to history. History used to be my least favorite subject until I started reading the Bible, so I'm sorry if you're suffering here. Gold was our first ever currency that hit all the things. It was a medium of exchange, a unit of account, portable, durable, divisible, fungible, store of value. Gold stored its value, so it was money and it still is money. How does gold store its value, but the US dollar doesn't store its value? Because gold has a limited supply. It can't be printed. There's no government that just prints unlimited gold. So therefore, because it can't be printed, it retains its value. And if you're wondering why all these people are buying Bitcoin and these digital currencies, it's because governments can't just infinitely print Bitcoin. Therefore, the limited supply makes it valuable. Lots of cryptocurrencies have values come from the fact that they can't be infinitely printed and they're not created by governments. So that's side note. I don't know enough about that to go deep into that. But why did we go from gold to dollars? And the reason is, my understanding is that eventually gold worked very well. You traded it. We had it in coins. It was durable, divisible, fungible, stored value. But essentially, we didn't want people to be... I can tell you the simple and historic reason. Simply put, I don't think people wanted to walk around with bags of gold. And less simply put, which I should just tell you the history because I'm already going this deep. Less simply put, during World War I and World War II, and you're going to learn how the US dollar becomes so powerful. Why is it the most powerful currency in the world? Here's why. Gold was the currency. Then countries advanced. We didn't want to carry around money bags of gold. So what we did is we created dollars. And the dollars actually had no value, but they signified how much gold you owned. So if I had a $20 bill, I could take that $20 bill and trade it for $20 worth of gold at the bank. This is what US dollars used to be. US dollars used to be a piece of paper that signified how much gold you owned. And if you gave someone $20, they now were legally entitled to $20 worth of gold at the bank, and they could go to the bank and cash that in. So what was the issue with this system? Why is our US dollar no longer backed by gold? And by the way, every fiat currency up until this point, remember, a fiat currency is a currency not backed by gold. Every paper currency up until this point, over 600 of them, collapsed that wasn't backed by gold. Not a single fiat currency in history has survived the long test of time, which you should be scared because all the currencies in the world are fiat currencies right now, and I'm going to explain to you how we got there. Essentially, we didn't want to carry around money bags of gold, so we created these dollars. These dollars signified how much gold you owned. $20 equaled $20 worth of gold. You could take that to the bank, cash it in. Life was good. Currency was money. Money was good. The US dollar was money at the time because it stored its value. World War I happens. World War II happens. What happens is on the other side of the world, all the countries are fighting each other. And in America, we're having the Industrial Revolution and we're just rinsing out guns. We're rinsing out food, supplies. And what do you think we're doing with the guns and foods and supplies while all the other countries on the other side of the world are in war? We're selling them our guns, our supplies, our food. We're selling it for their gold. So during World War I and World War II, we're just rinsing gold, which is great because our dollar's backed by gold. Gold is a real currency. Our dollar just signifies that we own it. And we're absolutely rinsing. Awesome. Now, the issue, I need to find the accurate amount. By the end of World War II, the USA owned 2/3 of the world's gold because it sold goods and supplies to other countries who were in war in exchange to gold. So after World War II, in 1944, the United States of America owned 2/3 of the world's gold, and the rest of the world shared 1/3 of the world's gold, and Europe didn't have any gold. So imagine this. All the world currencies are backed by gold. Yet, the United States, because they're selling all this equipment to people during war, acquires 2/3. One country acquires 2/3 of the world's gold, and all 140 other countries share 1/3 of the world's gold, and Europe, which is such a big part of the world, doesn't have any gold. So all these countries are freaking out about not having gold that they can back their currency on. So they don't want to become fiat currencies because every fiat currency in history up until this point has failed. So what do? They say, the United States has all that gold and their currency is backed by all that gold. So instead of backing our currency on gold that we don't have, let's back our currency on the US dollar, which is backed by all the gold. So that is how the US dollar became the strongest currency in history. Life is good. The USA has very strong money because the money is backed by gold, therefore it stores its value. But when all these other countries wanted to back their currency on our US dollar, we didn't create any limits on how much we would print. So we did have a finite, although we had a lot of gold, we had a finite supply of gold. And some silly goose in the government decided to just infinitely print money. And therefore, they created more money than they had in gold reserves. And so they had an issue. And the way they solved that issue was by going onto the gold exchange standard, which meant that they would still back the US dollar by gold. They would just back it at a ratio. So before, the $20 would go to the bank and you could trade it for $20 of gold. But now $50 would go to the bank and you trade it for $20 worth of gold. So the currency was still backed by gold, but a higher bill amount meant less gold amount, which is worrisome. Fast forward, the US has their own problems. They end up shipping gold around the world. They lose some of their gold, and then they print more and more money. And turns out they print way more money than they have gold, and they can't even ratio the amount of money they have to gold. In France, the president of France is like, yo, the dollar is not backed by sufficient gold. So he knows, because at the time you were allowed to trade your dollar for gold. So the president of France is worried because the USA is printing so much money that he goes, quick, let's cash in our US dollars for gold. So they send back all their US dollars and get the ratio of gold back to their country. Humans are such sheep-like creatures that all the other countries see what France is doing, and a bunch of other countries start requesting their gold for US dollars back. So now a bunch of countries around the world are requesting gold, which they're legally entitled to, because it says it on the bill, you can go change it for bank. And they start sending back US dollars, which is crazy. So the US lost 50% of its gold supply from 1959 to 1971, and they gained a bunch of dollars. And they realized if countries keep asking for their gold back, they're not going to have enough gold to give every country the amount of dollars they've printed. So they realized they're absolutely screwed, because if that happens, the whole world's economy is going to collapse, because every currency is based on the dollar and the dollar is based on gold. So I believe it was President Nixon essentially was like, dude, we have no choice. And he took the dollar off of being backed by gold. So on August 15th in 1971, the dollar standard starts, and all the world's currencies are no longer backed by gold because the dollar was no longer backed by gold. So in the matter of one day, every currency in the world, which was backed by the US dollar, which was backed by gold, every currency in the world essentially became a fiat currency in the matter of one day, which I, with my limited understanding of this history and money, am confused why the world didn't riot and figure out a new monetary plan. But for some reason, the US dollar came off of gold and everyone was chill with it. And that's why the US dollar up until this point has been the strongest currency, because all the other currencies are backed on the US dollar. But now countries are starting to get worried because they're like, why are we letting the US dollar be so strong? Why are we all backed by the US dollar? Which is why you should be worried and you should go do your own research. I highly recommend the Hidden Secrets of Money.com absolutely great. I will link it down in this podcast below if you want to learn more in depth about what I'm talking about. So now, like I said, you can't have a relationship with someone you don't know. You can't have a relationship with money if you don't know it. Now I understand fiat currencies don't succeed. The dollar is a fiat currency. Not only is the dollar a fiat currency, it's printed by the government and the banks. The people who print it reward because they steal your purchasing power. What does it cost them to print it? Nothing. And then they change it for your time and energy, slavery. And that is being infinitely printed, so prices are going up. Basically, it's a lose, 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 lose to the average American. However, if you educate yourself, you can win in times of distress. Because if you own assets, that's why everyone says housing is so safe. If you own a house, the amount of dollars you pay for that house will always go up, but the house doesn't lose it's not that the house, if a house goes from $1 million to $3 million, it's not necessarily that the house got more valuable. It's that the currency lost its value. So you, as being a homeowner, are holding something that stores its value, aka money, and you're not holding something that loses its value, aka the US dollar, which shouldn't be called money. It should be called currency because it doesn't hold its value. Hopefully that makes sense. I know there's so much to unpack here. I highly recommend these resources. To recap this, money, part one, money is time and energy. The richest person is not the person who holds the most money. The richest person is the person who inputs the least and outputs the most because the goal is freedom. That was the takeaway from part one. The takeaway from part two is that the government prints, how the government prints money, which is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury swap glorified IOUs, which are bonds and Federal Reserve checks. That brings currency into existence because when the Federal Reserve writes a check, they bring it out of a bank account that has nothing. So essentially, they just print that money into thin air, which is actually what they do. And then, the Treasury is the one who prints it, but beside the point. When a currency is not backed by gold, it fails, which means that the dollar should eventually fail and all fiat currencies should eventually fail, which might be why all these digital currencies are succeeding. I don't know which digital currency is the best, but considering Bitcoin went from $6 to $60,000, people clearly have trust in it. The dollar loses its value every year. Please don't go buy a bunch of Bitcoin because you heard this. Go do your own research. Same with gold. Go do your own research. You can't have a relationship with something you don't understand. The government and the banks steal your purchasing power and then tax you on it. Absurd. The government prints money for free and then exchanges it for your time and energy. Slavery, wild. Depends on your definition of slavery, but I think it's wild. Now let's get to the good stuff, which is why I won't ever be worried about money. Or, I actually will be because I'll fail to my sinful nature. But why I think I don't struggle with money as someone who has less than $100 in their bank account is because I have this baby. That's right, the Bible. Now, I know we just went deep on the Bible, but really, none of this stuff is important because if you have God in your life, you'll be fine. And I would ask God, what relationship with money do you want me to have? Give me the relationship that you want me to have with money. And God, any money that I make, use it for your kingdom. How often do we want money so we can build our kingdom? God, I say this prayer right here. This is a real prayer. God, I ask you, whatever money I make, whether it be millions or minuscule, whatever assets I own, whatever time and energy I possess, God, use it for your kingdom. I know that in my sinful nature, I'm constantly thinking, how do I build my kingdom? How do I build my podcast world? How do I build my fame, my influence, my assets? God, I pray that you would just come in my heart and rewire it so that I would ask myself not how I build my kingdom, but how do I build your kingdom? God, I pray that you would open the hearts and souls of the people listening, and that I would read these Bible verses about money, and that it would just give them ease, even though the government is screwing us, even though the dollar might go to zero, even though that we might face, even though we're constantly facing inflation. God, I just pray that you would let these Bible verses put these people at ease, because you can either be a slave to money or a slave to Christ. And I ask that I would forever be a slave to Christ. In Jesus' name, amen. Let me read you some of my favorite Bible verses. I'm going to start with Hebrews 13:5. I'm trying to get better at not just quoting Bible verses without context. Hebrews is written to the Hebrew believers, the Hebrew Christians at the time, which was pretty much everyone. So this one's not, as far as I'm aware, Hebrews is not written to a specific church. It's written to a majority of Christians at the time. And there's 4 types of love in the Bible, which I wish we had these 4 types of loves in English, because it would make talking a lot easier, which are 4 types of love: storge, philia, eros, and agape. Storge love is a type of love based on family bonds. That's like the love I have for my dad or my mom, my future son, not wife actually. Storge, a type of love based on family bonds. Then you have philia, deep friendship or based on mutual respect. So I might love my best friends that I met in school. I might love a podcaster because I have respect for them. That's philia love. Eros love. This is what all you degenerates are craving. Romantic or passionate love. Best contained inside of a marriage. Don't get me wrong. I want some Eros love as well after marriage. And then we have agape love, which is God's love, characterized by its unconditional nature along with sacrifice and selflessness. That means, as humans, we have conditional love. If I have a girlfriend and I cheat on her, she's probably going to love me less. However, when I cheat on God every day with my sinful nature, he doesn't love me less, because his love is unconditional. It's marked by sacrifice when Jesus went up on the cross and died for me. Selflessness, that the God of the universe would contain himself to a meat suit for 33 years, live the perfect life I should have lived, die the death that I deserved so that I can spend eternity with him. That's agape love. And in Hebrews 13:5, it says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. I looked up, keep your lives free from the love of money. I looked up what kind of love is it talking about? Because in Hebrew, in the Bible, there's 4 different types of love. And it says, keep yourself free from the agape love of money. When you treat money with agape love, which is a love that's supposed to go to God, you will be let down. When you love money as your God, you will be let down. God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. I, just being totally open and vulnerable here, have less than $100 in my bank account. There's been so many times this year I've had less than $100 in my bank account. I actually have like $11,000 in student debt, and I don't pay it off, so it's inflating the money I have to pay. And I'm telling you, I stress about money less than anyone I know. Now I'm speaking from a place of privilege because I live with my parents, so I'm blessed in that way right now. But the reason I don't worry is because God has said right here in Hebrews 13:5, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Keep your lives free from the love of money. I know I just filmed a 45-minute podcast about money, but there's no love. I'm going to be smart about money. I'm going to attract money so that I can use it, but I have no need for money, no love for money. I don't work for money because, as you said, if you work for money, you're working for something that the government has printed, and therefore you are, for lack of less intense word, a slave to money. Now, I'm bringing the Bible into this. Does the Bible back the idea that someone can be a slave to money? Well, let's see. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Matthew 6:24. Will be devoted to one and despise the other. If I'm going to be devoted to either money or God, I'm taking God every time. And if I'm going to despise one or the other, I'm taking money. I'm a little confused with that because I don't know if the message here is to just hate money. I need to look into that more. I'll admit my ignorance here. I need to study. I should have done that before the podcast. But the point is, the Bible seems to make it clear that a lot of people serve money. And I would say America makes it very clear that a lot of people serve money. So, therefore, pick. Who are you going to serve, God or money? And when I was going through the whole money is a paper form of time and energy, the government prints money for free, trades it for your time and energy, then therefore you are a slave. Is that biblically? I don't want to make claims that aren't biblically backed. And of course, go do your research. Don't take my word as stone. It's right here. The Bible will transform you. That's all you need. But 1 Corinthians 7:22 says, "And remember, if you were a slave when the Lord called you, you are now free in the Lord. And if you are free when the Lord called you, you are now a slave of Christ." So I found it interesting when I was doing this think work. I was reading the Bible. I was looking at money. And I, outside of the Bible, decided that working with your time and energy for something that someone else printed for free was slavery. And I said, well, I don't want to be a slave to money, but is it possible to not be a slave to money? And that's so funny because 1 Corinthians 7:22 says, "And remember, if you were a slave when the Lord called you." The Bible seems to imply that you were a slave when the Lord called you. What were you a slave to? I'm sure that in this example, it's probably overarching talking about sin because sin covers pretty much anything that's not God. If you're a slave to anything that's not God, then you're a slave to sin. And in Matthew 6:24, it seems to make it a big point that money is one of the most common things people are enslaved to. And it says, "And remember, if you were a slave when the Lord called you, you are now free in the Lord. However, and if you were free when the Lord called you, you are now a slave to Christ." So the Bible doesn't imply that you should just be free from the slavery to money because God freed you. It says, no, you're going to be a slave to something. So you better replace that slavery to money with the slavery to God. That is the solution. If you do not want to be obsessed with money, if you don't want your life to be overruled and overrun worrying about money, there was a famous billionaire who wrote some novels. I think it was the Harry Potter. She went on Oprah, billionaire, and she said, "I still worry about money." If you want to fill a hole that you can't fill with money, you're not going to do it without God. Take your slavery to money and put it in God. And now this whole episode is about money, but I want to take this out of money for a second. Take your slavery from sin and put it into God. You do not fame. I've fallen for that one. Oh, big time. I want love from romantic partners. I've fallen for that one big time. I want attention from girls. I think attention from my favorite celebrities, from the most attractive females. I think that an absurd amount of money, internet recognition is going to fill that hole. Oh, I've fallen into those patterns. God, replace that. Replace the love for fame. Replace the love for my work, for my YouTube channel, for my money. Replace it with the love of Christ, God. Because I know that I'm not going to escape slavery. So if I'm not going to escape slavery, I might as well put myself in the most loving, beautiful, powerful master there is. The one who created the heavens and the earth, the plants, the skies, the humans with billions of cells. The one who would be willing to come humble himself to a human existence for 33 years in a meat suit, die on a cross, the death I should have deserved. You're telling me that can be my slave master, my slave master can be someone who is perfect in existence, all powerful, the creator of everything, who would love and die for me, that has the agape love that I don't even show my favorite humans on earth. That can be my slave master. Sign me up forever. Boom. I hope you learned something valuable here. I love you all. Turn to Jesus. Amen.